I would like, first of all, to thank all of you for coming. I have many doubts if such an evening can take place in Tel Aviv. I doubt very much if such a crowd would show up to listen to me. I want to thank the university and my publishing house, Verso, for organizing this evening. It's really after a very concentrated week in Canada, which was very encouraging for me to see that wherever we fail in Israel, but we get some kind of voice and some kind of echo abroad, which is also important, and I'll get into it very soon. Mahmoud told you a little bit about my background, but I would like to elaborate a little bit about it. He even mentioned the two dark sides in my career, both serving in the Israeli army and what is much worse than this, working for Shimon Peres. But nobody is perfect. And this was many, many years ago. But what is important to our discussion today is that I was really a typical product of the Israeli education system, a typical product of the Israeli media, and a typical product of the Israeli brainwashing system. For many, many years, I was sure that we are always right, the Arabs are always wrong, we are the victims, they want to destroy us, and so forth, all those cliches that we were all brought up on. And it was only in the late 80s when I, almost by accident, started to travel to the occupied territories as a journalist. And it was only then when I realized, after a few months of almost random visits, I realized that the biggest drama of Israel is taking place in its dark backyard. There is almost no one to document it for the Israelis, and there is almost no one who wants to know about what's going on there. I always say that I fulfill the wet dream of every journalist because my stories are always exclusive. I wish they would be less exclusive, but they are usually exclusive. And then in the late 80s, I realized that I would like to dedicate my professional career to document the occupation for the Israeli readership, above all, to try to tell them what they don't want to know, and to try to write for them what they don't want to read. And ever since then, over 20 years, I'm doing it. A very ungrateful job. Many times I feel I'm writing for the archives, which is also a job, but it's not exactly my ambition. And it took me so many years to understand, so many years later, how come that a society like the Israeli society, which is not combined only by monsters, and some of you met Israelis, they are not monsters. How come that such a society lives so much in peace with what's going on in its backyard? Israeli society, many of them are really people with values. In any catastrophe or disaster in the world, Israel is the first one to send rescue missions. Most of the Israeli young people would help an old lady to cross the road many times, even if she doesn't want to cross the road. People with values. And it took me so many years to understand how can it be? Because there were many, many longer occupations in history rather than the Israeli one. There were even more brutal occupations in history. But there was never, as far as I can recall, and Mahmoud, you are from the academia, maybe you'll correct me, I don't remember one occupation in which the occupier felt so good about himself, and what is even more than this, there was never an occupation in which the occupier presented himself as a victim. This I can hardly recall any example, because the Israelis, at least at the last 10 years, but ever since then, feel so good about themselves. They are deeply convinced, and I'm serious about it, that the IDF is the most moral army in the world. Many times I try to tell them, let's be a little modest, let's say the second moral army in the world. There will be maybe the army of Luxembourg is more moral, and we are the second. They will be deeply offended, and I'm serious. And they'll call you traitor for thinking that the Israeli army is the second moral army in the world. They are deeply convinced that we are right, that 6 billion people in the world are wrong, and 5 million Jews in Israel are right. And there is a whole machinery, and I want to talk about this, the whole machinery which enables the Israelis to feel so good about themselves and to be responsible for so many atrocities, crimes, and violation of the international law. It was back in the early 90s when I was once standing in the Kalandia checkpoint, which looked then totally different. And I was looking at the environment, not at the people for a moment. And the environment was really depressing. Garbage, hundreds and thousands of people waiting under the sun or under the rain without any protection, no toilets, no water. And I asked myself, why is it so? Because it's not a question of budget. And then I realized it's about the soldiers, it's not about the Palestinians who are waiting. It's about preventing the soldiers to get any kind of thinking or sense that they are confronting human beings. Because then question might be raised. But as long as they got this message that the crowd that is standing in front of them are not human beings, or at least not human beings like them, they won't ask any questions. I wrote once that we treat the Palestinians like animals, and then I got so many protest letters from animals' rights organizations. Speaking about animals, there were 2 dogs killed in Operation Cast Lead. In this operation that I refuse to call it a war because it was not a war, I'll get to it later, 2 Israeli dogs were killed, the operation, the attack on Gaza. 1 dog was killed in a villa in Ashkelon from a Qassam. The other dog was killed with the troops inside Gaza. Both dogs, and I know you might not believe me, but it's pure facts, both dogs, which were killed in 2 different days, got front page coverage in the Israeli media. Their pictures, their funerals, their owners being quoted, how clever and intelligent they were and faithful, names, obviously, front page. In the very same day that those 2 dogs were killed, were obviously tens and tens of Palestinians killed. Their story appeared in page 16, in page 17, by the end of another story, without a headline, without images, without names, obviously. And the message to the reader is a very simple one. The reader knows that the important stories appear on front page, and the less important stories appear later on. So the message was very, very clear, and it's not an incident, that happened only once. This is systematically throughout decades, that the life of 2 Israeli dogs are much worse than the life of tens of Palestinians. This is being projected, being transmitted to the Israeli society systematically, day after day, for years. When you feel that they are not human beings, you can maintain such an occupation almost forever. No doubts, no question marks, and feel so good about yourself, and feel so proud about yourself. But this is not enough for the Israeli society, because it has to protect itself from a new thing. After Cast Lead, Operation Cast Lead, I see it as a turning point, at least in public opinions, at least in Europe, not yet with governments, but with public opinions for sure in Europe, and maybe also in this country. The world became less tolerant toward the Israeli aggression, less tolerant toward the Israeli violence. And critics started to be heard really everywhere, and Israel became really a condemned place, more than ever. Would you think that this will change any perception in Israeli society? Not at all.